Yeah. Hi guys, we're here with your PowerPoint. It's Louise Nevelson for February. Just going to go through the PowerPoint. I'm not going to read everything. You guys are all smart and can read yourselves, but I'm going to just give you a few tips. Louise Nevelson, she was called the original recycler. She was an odd bird. She wore lots of false eyelashes. She wore a lot of fur, bright colors, a ton of jewelry. But at the end of her life, she gave away most of her possessions except for her jewels and her clothes because she just wanted to live simply. Anyway, there she is. Okay, so she was an American sculptor known for her monumental, monochromatic wooden wall pieces and outdoor sculpture. Next. This is one of her golds. She collected found objects from the streets of New York, and then she painted them a monochromatic color. The effect is to lose the identity of the individual and see the assemblage shapes that tells parts of the story. We're going to talk about assemblage in a minute. And then the random pieces of wood take on a new life and become part of something instead of an individual piece. So Dear Louise was actually born in Russia, September 23rd, 1899. Some people say she was born 1900, but Grace said 1899, so we're sticking with that. Her family moved to Maine in 1905. One interesting fact about her was that her father came ahead of her family 2 years earlier. She was so upset about that she did not speak for 6 months. Interesting. Her father built a successful lumber yard, and that influenced her throughout her life. But at the age of 9, she decided she was going to be an artist because she saw a sculpture of Joan of Arc at her local library. Okay. Let's see. She felt like an outsider in her small town. She had a different religion than most. She spoke a different language. They spoke Yiddish at home. And she was taller than most children her age. She was actually captain of her basketball team. When she graduated high school, she decided she wanted to escape her small town, and her dream was to move to New York City. She got a job as a stenographer, and that's where she met her husband, Charles Nevelson. They got married and did just that, moved to New York City. A few years later, she gave birth to her only child. His name was Myron, or Mike. That was 2 years later, and this is actually a picture of Louise, Myron, and Charles. So, when she was in New York, she began to study painting, drawing, singing, acting, and dancing. Her family, her husband's family was very well-to-do. They were socialites and expected her to follow along the same lines, but she was not having it. She wanted to have a job. Her parents thought it was great to listen to Beethoven. His parents thought it was great to listen to Beethoven, but not to be Beethoven. She became more and more upset living away from her artist community. So she left her husband. She moved back to New York City and left her son. And the couple eventually divorced in 1941. In 1931, she sent her son to live with her family. She sold a diamond bracelet her husband had given to her upon the birth of her son, so she could travel to Europe and study art, study under a German artist in Munich. Yeah, that's good stuff. She moved back to New York City when she was done studying. She gained employment as an assistant to Diego Rivera. Picture of him right here. He is going to come up next month when we do Frida Kahlo. She worked with him on his mural called Man at the Crossroads. It was at Rockefeller Plaza. It actually does not, was never finished and was destroyed. Mr. Rockefeller did not like it, so Diego Rivera went back to Mexico and he painted one there, and it's a very, very interesting story. If you get a chance, you should read up on it because it's fascinating. During this time, she was a starving artist. She made no money, and she lived poorly, and she lived simply for her art. For several years, she wandered the streets gathering wood to burn in her fireplace to keep warm. This sort of became the beginning of the artwork that made her so famous. So this is one of her first sculptures. It's called The Clown as the Center of His World. It's an early example of her using found objects. It was not well received, but it was the beginning of her found object art. She was so unhappy about these that she destroyed most of these pieces, so these are very rare and worth a fortune. It was inspired by Picasso's Cubist style art, and we see Picasso, his influence in her art throughout the rest of her life. Let's talk about assemblage. It's a technique using many different objects glued, woven, or placed together. She's best known for her assemblages. She would use found objects and spray paint to disguise their actual use. And assemblages are always 3D. A collage is 2D, and an assemblage is 3D. So early on, she was taught to use only a few colors, such as black and white. So she painted her art black until 1959. She believed that black was the total color, meaning that it contained every other color there was. In the 60s, she began using white. It reminded her of the early morning. And then every once in a while, she would use gold. She was told when she was a child that the streets of America would be paved with gold when they got here. So that's where the gold comes from. She started making what are called her walls, probably what she's very well known for. She would assemble her boxes into very large assemblages that were called walls. This one down here, it measures 8 feet by 24 feet by 1 foot, so giant. It is called Sky Cathedral. She shifted the idea of sculpture as an object one walks around to an environment that surrounds the viewer. She wanted the people looking at her art to be immersed in it. This is a wall. It's called the Homage to 6 Million. It's a massive curved wall, but it's made up of individual boxes. Each box is the same, yet the interiors of each are different. It speaks to the unbelievable number of Jews who died during the Holocaust. She herself was Jewish, so she felt this deeply in her bones. She originally wanted to exhibit this work in a dark room with no light at all. She wanted visitors to feel their way through her art exhibit, but she was eventually talked into showing it with a blue light, which is probably for the best because it would have rubbed all the paint off and we would never be able to see it. Mm-hmm. She did, in her 70s, she began to be commissioned to create outdoor sculptures. Her first was for Princeton University. It's right here, still stands today. In 1978, a small plot in Lower Manhattan was renamed Louise Nevelson Square. She has 7 tree-shaped monuments there that she created and were installed by her, and still stands today as well. And then Louise died on April 17th, 1988, at her home in New York City. This is a picture of something on eBay today. So if you have a mere $45,000, you could purchase that. It is 18 inches by 22, so small. But yeah, if you need to add to your art collection, there it is, 45 grand, no problem. This I just thought the kids would love. It was a picture of her bathroom. Art really was her entire life. Those were some of the pieces she had painted and was going to use. She would either spray paint or sometimes she would dip the whole item in a big vat of black paint.
Which we won't be doing.
Yeah.
No.
We will not be doing that. And feel free, though, really. That is your prerogative if you're into vats of black paint. Just a couple fun facts about her. She was born Leah Berliowski. When she moved her name was Americanized to Louise. And then, of course, her married name was Nevelson. She and her husband honeymooned in Cuba. I thought that was kind of interesting. Metal reminded her of her son at war, so she chose to work with wood. At that time, there were her contemporaries. One of them was Alexander Calder, who was definitely working with steel. Steel was very expensive because of the war. She could not afford it, and it upset her because it reminded her of her son. Let's see, this Nevelson sculpture here, it's called Skygate. It was destroyed in 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Centers. It was hanging and, of course, lost, which is just awful.
Another tragedy.
Yep. And then in 2000, the United States Postal Service released a series of commemorative stamps. You can also buy those on eBay. They're not quite as expensive as her actual artwork. And at the time of her death, her estate was worth at least $100 million. And that's it, folks. If you have any questions, let us know. Have a great month.